If you've got now additional questions from Jeff's presentation and Jason's presentation, these pass those in or out to the outside, and various staff will pick those up. I've got to say, as a member of a ranch family, as I was sitting over here listening to these three phases, something sort of hit me, and I'm going to share something I'm embarrassed about as a family. We only pay $1 a head to get this kind of work done. We're a $55 billion farm gate business, and all I'm investing is $1 a head. Shame on me. I remember the first audit, and I was pretty excited as a young faculty member to get to participate in the first audit, and we got the results, and I raced back to Gunnison to the high country to show it to my father. It's always a good checkpoint for how things are going. My dad listened, and he looked at all the stuff, and then he said, "So what the hell do you want me to do?" Right? Fair enough. So, Dad, here's what I want you to do. I want you to answer this question. How do we deliver best in world products and services? Not just good, best in world. Because when I think about the amount of risk all of you take, and the amount of pain it is to be in business today, is anything else really worth the effort, given the amount of risk we got in the game? That's what the audit asks us. Can we be best in world? 3 pillars: eating satisfaction, product integrity, telling the story. Those 3 pillars ought to drive a lot of the way we think, in my opinion. And so as we listened through the strategy workshop, there were a whole lot of things that sort of came to bear, and we will be handing out, when we're all done, a copy of the executive summary, and the full-on reports, John Patterson, will be available online. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so this stuff really is worth studying. So here are a few key action steps. Here's one of the challenges that I think we've learned, is that we don't define the words in the same way. Any of us who are married understand the problems that occur when words are defined differently. So we need to define value and communicate them broadly, because in fact, if you think back to that, what's the root cause? This may in fact be the root cause of the communication problem inside the industry. We're saying one thing and hearing another when we talk to people up and down the chain. We need to build a proactive strategy based on the recognition that quality encompasses more than just the product. Early on, it was so cool because we could focus on make the product attributes better. Get rid of bruises, get rid of injection sites, improve taste, flavor, eliminate waste, work on consistency. That was awesome, man, because that was a product attribute. It was easy to get your hands around. But what we hear in this audit, it's also the process. And the closer you get to the consumer, the more the process matters. And I've got to tell you, based on Gary Smith's comments, I think this is the one that could undo us. If we miss on explaining the process in the right way, up and down the supply chain, we may be at risk. Continuous improvement. Here's what I take away from the audit, and there's great news in this audit. We did a lot of things well. We're doing a lot of things better. We've made significant changes in industry. But as Peter Drucker said, the productivity of people requires continuous learning, as the Japanese have taught us. It requires adoption in the West of the specific Japanese Zen concept where one learns to do better what one already does well. And I know how hard that message is to deal with in the light of corn prices and drought and government intervention. I get it every single day because we fight it with you. But if we take our eye off of this, we're going to be wrong. And so it's this intense quality focus, and I think it's really simple. It's just no excuses, just unrelenting effort by everybody. Everybody. And we got to reconnect with our friends in the dairy industry. We need to ask them to come to the quality table on beef. And we got to ask the trucking industry to come to the table with us. And we got to ask everybody who sells an input into our industry to come to the table. When we engage people, good things happen. When people are engaged, good things happen. This is results from Gallup, who does an awful lot of work in looking at productivity and quality management inside lots of companies. 1 million employees, over hundreds of companies representing tens and dozens of industries. If you compare the top engagement, those employees who, by God, I'm bought in, I believe I'm an owner, as opposed to those employees who are actively disengaged, I don't care. If you compare those two quadrants, the top 25 for engagement and the top 25 who just don't give a damn, and you compare them across all these industries, this is what's really cool. And I want to point to about 4 things. 1, safety failures for people go down 49% when people are engaged, when they've bought in, when they have the mindset of an owner. Quality failures, defect rate goes down 60% when your people behave like owners. 60%. That's phenomenal. And of course, because I'm a blatant capitalist, profits go up 12%. And productivity follows it at 18. And customer satisfaction is higher. So when our people are bought in, we do better. And that's an important question for all of us to ask. Is everybody in? Or do we have folks on the fringe who haven't quite bought into the story? And we got to communicate the story. We know that. Okay. I spent part of last week in Washington, D.C. God, I'm glad I'm back here. It's time for courage in our message. And it is time to set aside any effort that's about spinning it. What's the truth? Period. No spin, just the truth. We can't afford to be selectively transparent as an industry. We cannot afford to be selectively transparent. Every decision, every process, every input, every technology needs to be utilized intentionally. And the way to get at that intentionality is to ask 3 questions of everything we do. Will this decision that I'm about to make affect the eating quality of the product? Does this decision improve the product integrity and thus grow consumer trust? And third, is the thing that I'm about to do, am I going to be proud to make this part of my industry's story? That's the easiest way for me to take all this data and put it into action for us. Now I'm going to be bold for a second. You know, I'm a professor, so I can get away with this, I think. I got to tell you, I think Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3 results ought to be central to the decision-making of every industry body for the next 5 years. Where you spend your time, your money, and your energy is pretty well dictated in these results. There are great messages about where we should go with our time and energy and money. And all of us who care about this business should buy into this, and we should study this with great intensity because there's a lot of data. It is a large, massive, complex data set. It is detailed. Mining it, understanding it, and leveraging the information for progress is absolutely critical, or we will have wasted the money, and that would be unspeakable. Chuck Schroeder, when he was at NCBA in 2000, said, if we don't take advantage of becoming customer-oriented, we'll just be one more generation that missed the opportunity. food business climate is one of impatient customers and aggressive marketers. What you decide here will determine the direction the industry takes. And I think that's right. We determine that every single day in every decision that we make. There are two options, to be honest, in business. We can get it right. Or we can explain to customers, clients, and critics why we didn't. There's not any other options. Those are the two options. One is easier than two. In our society today, we have lots of examples of that, don't we? So the choice is ours, it's yours, it's mine, it's a shared choice that we get to make. We're going to take the baton. I think it's an important question. I'll leave you with that question. Why? Because it matters to him. Glad to get the rest of the questions up, and we'll start into our Q&A session. Let's thank our three presenters again, please. Okay, and in no particular order, we'll just start with some of these, and I'm going to ask a couple, I think, that I'd like all three of you to respond to. This is sort of like the presidential debates. No spin, though, just the truth, guys. What is our industry's single biggest vulnerability? Based on what you saw in the audit, in total, whoever would like to start, but what's the biggest single vulnerability for our business?
Or you look at me. I'm going to say food safety. As an industry, part of the communication disconnect that appeared to occur is prioritization of the importance of food safety to the longevity of the industry. And I'm sort of a quality guy personally. I mean, that's what I do. But food safety has long-term ramifications, and we need to make sure that we continue to improve on the product integrity issues that we've been good about dealing with. We need to continue that progress.
I agree with Keith. That's the area that if something goes wrong, it can really go wrong. Quality is either gradual improvement or gradual decline. But safety can be a blow up or something. And so I think that's the greatest vulnerability.
I guess I'd have to say providing information to consumers. And I think, yes, we're trying to do a better job of that and having ranchers where cattle are coming from on the internet and on YouTube. But if a consumer wants to know why cattle are fed corn versus grass, do we have that information available in an unbiased, no-spin, science-based manner? Same with the use of any technology or anything. So I think it has to do with why we do certain things in the industry and a basis for that a consumer can have access to readily.
So I would just ask both Jeff and Keith, so if we accept food safety as the number one vulnerability, then let's think down to number two, because I'm curious what number two would be in maybe all three of your minds. What's the next thing following food safety? If we get food safety right, then what's the next one that's the tipping point mistake that if we make it, we may lose consumer demand?
I don't think you'll find any disagreement amongst any of us. I mean, this disconnect that we have with the general public at this point, and what Dr. Hola mentioned of being able to transmit information with cattle and beef products up and down the marketing chain, it's huge. It's huge. We've got to be more proactive in making the general public aware of how and why we do things.
Yeah, I agree on that too. I think, and I don't know where you go. I mean, if you look at the power that people have, that within a 15, 20-minute time period, they could be blogging, they could have a site up anti-whatever you're doing because they either have agenda or they don't understand. And the power that has today is just remarkable. And so how you get out of the front side of that, and that's, you know, the greatest development in the last several years is all the people that are hungry for information, right or wrong information about all kinds of things, but especially where food comes from. So, you know, that's also that part. And even, you know, I remember years ago I heard a guy that talked about that he was at the county fair with his child, grandchild or something, and they were leading a heifer out, and he reached behind and grabbed the tail and pulled it up on the back. And I'm not going to ask for show of hands, but 80% of the people in here have done that. And somebody went ballistic in seeing that and said, how dare you harm that animal like that? And so you can just imagine just all these other things that go on that if you don't have an answer, if you're not providing an answer, somebody else will. And so that's a threat that's probably not within the scope of the quality audit, other than some of the things that Keith has brought up that have been important about some of the concerns that people further down the chain have.
To maybe paraphrase this question, but early on in the audits, that was sort of eliminate waste fat, enhance taste fat, and it would appear that we've made pretty significant progress in enhancing marbling, taste fat, so we've improved quality grade, we've made good progress. What else do we have to do to maintain and enhance customer satisfaction relative to the eating composite value of our product? What beyond just that push for marbling? What else do we need to focus on?
Taste. Taste has become the number one most important thing to the sectors of the industry that deal most closely with the consumer. And so we need to expend some effort now to ensure that we maintain a flavorful and tender experience for everybody that consumes beef.
And so the actual action steps to do that, where do cow-calf producers, feeders, stocker operators focus to enhance taste?
I think we have some information coming on that. I know NCBA has grasped onto this endeavor, and I believe that we're starting to develop some data that indicates where we are and perhaps what sorts of things we can do going forward. I wouldn't say there's any solid answers at this point, because I think this is a relatively new phenomenon that we're actually studying taste to the degree that we are. Dr. Sable will probably want to comment on this, but it's been a topic on and off over the years, but to really focus some energy towards it, I believe is something that's new, and it's going to be one of those things that we work on over the next 5 to 10 years.
Dr. Sable?
Can you turn it up just a little bit so we can hear you?
How do you do that?
I have no idea.
Put it in the middle, Keith.
Yeah, just pull it up closer.
Put it in the middle. Yeah.
Better?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Tom, I think that going back, and Keith had a very interesting part when he talked about that, out on the table, the executive summary of the National Beef Tenderness Survey is there. And, you know, with all the things that have gone on the last, number of years, concern about quality and concern about tenderness and all that, those data look very, very good. And so I think he brought up a good point. He said, once you get to this kind of acceptable level of tenderness, what else kind of kicks in? And probably then that's for flavor, and that's where, beef is differentiated probably more importantly than probably the other proteins that consumers have there. And so again, if you have a tender product that doesn't deliver on something on the flavor, it may not necessarily be more satisfying. And so I think it'd be kind of interesting to see how this kind of goes through. And you're right, we've talked about taste fat and waste fat, but that further defining what all that characteristic of taste. Years ago we fought the tenderness battle so much. I mean, if you didn't get tender, it didn't matter how well what the flavor was. was. And so I think we've made great strides, or the industry's made great strides in that. So now it's kind of that second thing, what are you doing to make sure that people are satisfied with the eating satisfaction? And, they can also be preparation too. You think about the number of the meals that are eaten out, things like that, having some properly prepared, properly seasoned, presented, and all those, and helping people understand how to cook it at home too. That's a part of it that's in addition to the inherent nature of the product.
There's this evolving trend that we're noticing, and I don't know if everybody else is noticing this trend, but there's sort of this crowd of folks that's sort of food geeks. Food has become an art again. And I'm kind of excited about that because I think it offers some really neat opportunities for our industry. And going forward, I think knowledge about taste and all of the other attributes, texture and other things that we've sort of forgotten about, I think those are going to be important in helping create beef as an art form going forward. And
I hate to admit in front of everybody, but I'm more likely to take a picture of my food before I eat it than I am to pray about it. I'm just like everybody else now. It's just they bring the food out, and the first thing you got to do is get your camera phone out and take a picture of it and put it on your blog. And so, it's just, you just watch, go to restaurants and see that. So Keith's right, it's kind of this celebration of food and wanting great food experiences and all those things, and sharing that with people, and you start following people that are in that. Every restaurant they go to, they'll talk about what they've eaten and how good it is, or maybe how not good it is. And so the pressure to deliver is probably the highest it's ever been.
To follow up on the marbling concept, marbling was really close between instrument grading and visual grading in terms of the average score. How much variation, though, was the variation around that mean the same between instrument grading and the visual assessment that was done as part of the cooler audit?
I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at that. I don't know that we looked at that specifically. Somewhere there's probably some standard deviations that go in those reports for that. So I don't know right off the top of my head.
Based on what you saw and the experience that all of you have, though, is instrument grading predicting the extremes as effectively as it is predicting the mean?
I think so. I think if you look, well, obviously Keith and his colleagues have got some great information that they presented in Chekhov Funded Research, where they've looked at the power of instrument grading on looking at the different marbling scores and how they delivered. And you take some pretty good information from the 80s and you even make that even better as far as the relationship between marbling and eating satisfaction. It may be taking some variation out of the human factor or whatever else is maybe predicted within that. But I just think that if you look at it, it's an exciting time that you can look at information gathered so differently over such a different time period and all that, and you kind of come back and they're basically one's predicting the other. And I think that's great news. I don't know what we'd done if it had been different, but I think the fact that you end up doing that and get to the end of the day and you've got such closeness, and even when you look at variation, how much of it's prime, choice, select, and even that, they're extremely close within that. And I think that's great.
Keith, you want to expand on any from your work?
Well, I think it's human nature to sort of compress things from the extremes towards the middle. And instruments don't do that. Instruments will call a carcass what it is. And so the net benefit of instrumentation is no matter what the standard was before instruments were implemented, the standard will remain constant from that point forward. And so if the line for choice was X, with human grading, it could move a bit back and forth. With an instruments, that doesn't happen. Whatever it was on the day it became the official, it's going to be there 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Another product attribute question, variation in ribeye size, particularly on the large end of that distribution. What's the real problem that the variation in ribeye size causes as you move through the chain, and what's the solution?
let me tackle that and see if these guys have. When we talk to, food service operators probably been most vocal on this, and part of that goes back to the point, there's two things happening. They are selling product that is to be sold in a portion size. So when you go to a restaurant, somebody's selling a 12-ounce steak, 8-ounce steak, 6-ounce steak, whatever. So, making all that fit the magic of something that gets bigger this way, something has to give to get it to the right ounces to be able to be sold. Well, that's easy for everybody to understand. But the second thing that's happened, especially in the last 3 years, or 4 years now, is as we talk to food service operators, they're saying, you've got to figure out some way to give me some smaller portions. And part of that goes back to the economy, that if you've got something where somebody's coming in, you've got to be able to have a portion size that they can sell for $9.99 or $10.99 or something. So you've got this kind of two things going at the wrong direction. And so if you look at a lot of the restaurants you go to now where they've got special menu parts, these are foods that you can get for under $10, or this is the $9.99 type thing like that. And I know talking to the cattle producers that can think about, give me the biggest thing you got. It's kind of like, said before, well, that's great for you. But when you're out here trying to figure out how to compete in the marketplace, it's this thing of trying to do that. And, there's been great work, and it's not to say that there aren't some alternatives. Of course, NCBA and through the check office looked at beef alternative merchandising, looking at some ways to cut cuts differently. And, if you really look at it, the last 20, 30 years, the beef industry's been doing that. I mean, you look at what boxed beef was when it first started, and you basically had whole, almost primals that were in a box, versus now when you go to a packing plant, and I remember sitting at the end of the line of one of the plants we were in this past year, and thinking about how many pieces came down there that were about this big. They're all export, they're going to something, so it's being cut into further iteration. That's also helped us remove a lot of the waste fat. It's also helped us find cuts that can go to different markets and things like that. But, somewhere in there, you've still got this thing of what do you do with these cuts as they get bigger and bigger. Now, I think with the instrument grading, the biggest ribeye we found with that was 28 inches. And, I don't know, but I've been in Europe and saw some Belgian blue that had 28-inch ribeyes, bulls, but I don't know what you do with that on that. Luckily, there's only one of those somewhere.
Invite a lot of friends to dinner.
Yeah, somebody in here said, can I get that?
Keith, observations, or Jason?
Well, NCBA and Bridget did a lot of good work a few years ago, and what they called, I think, was how do we deal with non-conforming product? So the extremes, the 28-inch ribeyes and the 1,200-pound carcasses, which we're seeing more of pretty frequently at this point. I think there's a couple things going on that are good news on that regard. Dr. Sable and I were with the company that told us that they now sort carcasses 45 different ways in their coolers to address the different marketing streams that those might fit. The bad news is none of those are weight sorts. And so going forward, there's going to be a threshold at some point at which we're going to meet either the biological ability of cattle to get that big, or we're going to meet the biological ability of the market to handle it. And that's going to be the end of the line. Interestingly enough, when they were doing the non-conforming beef study, we had a strategy workshop, much as we do with the, in fact, we did it at Texas A&M. Much as we do with the National Beef Quality Audit. And a lot of the food service operators that are pretty vocal about how large the cuts in the cattle are becoming, they told us some interesting things. When we asked them what cuts of the beef carcass are a problem, what would they say? They would say it's the ribeye. They would say it's the ribeye. And we'd say, well, what other cuts are a problem? It's the ribeye. And they'd say, if you could make the ribeyes a reasonable size, and then you could make the tenderloins really, really big, and that'd be a really valuable carcass. So there's some opportunities with this fabrication and carcass breaking and those sorts of opportunities that I think we still need to pursue.
Another question that comes from the audience, I think, is an important one, and it's one that's worth some thought, I think. So we've made the population of cattle more homogeneous in their color and their appearance. Do you think that's translated to a more homogeneous product and a more homogeneous eating experience? And if not, why not? And what's the step to get the industry to go the next series of steps towards improvement and not resting on this sort of artifactual approach to genetic identification?
Keith and I vote for you.
Well, I guess I'd almost think, I'm not sure we've made them as homogeneous as we sometimes think, just in terms of, maybe hide colors increasingly black, but as we all know, there's multiple breed types involved in that. And I almost think, you're just looking at the number of calves that are lightweight and going to grass or going straight to a feed yard. There's almost a divergence of marketplaces for calves at weaning. It's traditionally, they went to a feed yard. And so I'd almost say we're actually getting a little bit more variation in some cases. And thanks to very high-tech feedlot management, feeding practices, we're actually bringing them back around at the end. So, I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer to that.
Well, and I wonder, Tom, what the power of grid marketing programs that are obviously more in place now than at any other time of the audits, and the economic signals that are being sent about types, combinations of grades, coil grades, yield grades, and weights, and things like that, in these marketing programs. So agent source verified and all the myriad of Angus programs that are out there, how all that stuff's playing out. And I'm fascinated when I listen to cattle feeders talk about stuff, and they'll talk about sorts and management and things. I think things have been managed so much differently and more intensive today than at any other time. They just get in a bunch of cattle, feed them, and take them and sell them, and just pray to figure out or it's somebody else's problem. There's more information going back and forth. There's more people trying to figure out what can I do to fit this particular target, because there's economic rewards in that. And I think that's why we see fewer outliers maybe in some of these, and you've seen this increase in percent choice in prime. Would probably, even though the weights have gotten bigger, well, that's just going to happen. But we're not out here, what I think, going in there and having all these non-conforming carcasses. I think that's being reduced, and I think that's a great thing. But I think it's the signals that people have, and people understanding more about what it is to take to produce. And either they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, or they're getting paid for it.
Let's turn our attention to process real quick.
Let me stick my neck out on this just a little bit. I don't know if anybody noticed in the quality assurance NBQA video, there's a set of black cows in there with some white calves on the mothers in there. And I think that is indicative of an opportunity that I think a lot of you have taken advantage of. I think at the seed stock level, we're moving genetics towards combining the best of traits at the cow-calf level to produce maybe a more uniform, perhaps, I don't know, higher quality set of calves. And I think we're doing that with things like terminal crossbreeding programs, use of hybrid vigor, and those sorts of things. Just one person's.
Yeah, good observation. Process. So the audit said there are things that the supply chain cares about. Food safety, and it cares about how and where animals were raised, and it cares about our processes. So if you were able to give advice to this body as to how as an industry we evaluate where our risks are in those processes that we use as an industry, how would you go about that? What do we do to deal with that potential disconnect between us and consumers relative to the processes, protocols, and approaches we take as managers, so that we don't get caught in the crosshairs.
Go ahead.
I think anything you can do to get as close to consumers and those people that are dealing with consumers and get the information that they're getting, the questions that they're getting, and try to help formulate responses. As we do, especially our Beef 101 program that tends to have, that is non-producer related, is more, end users or people might be further down the chain, or even some of the retail and food service markets. It's amazing when they'll ask us questions that our customers are asking us about this. And it's, antibiotics, steroids, they'll use those terms, all these things that they feel like are something going on. I think the more you can take that and kind of come back, and it goes back to what Jason said at the start of this, and try to figure out where are you more susceptible, what is the message that somebody else is saying that you can try to come back and provide information on that. And I think that the negative has been so great over the years and continues to be so, and it can be magnified so quickly today that, almost doing a risk analysis. What is it that we've got the greatest risk? Now what do we do to be able to provide responses or modify where necessary?
Well, I've just gotten a note from the boss that we need to start wrapping up. So let me ask one last question to each of you. For cow-calf producers, seed stock operators, for folks who make their living raising and managing cattle, feed yard operators, etc., for those of us who work with these magnificent living beings, what's the take-home message that you'd like them to go home with from the results of the hard work you did in this study?
I'll throw my 2 cents out here. First, I probably worked closer, at least with the data from those producers. Unfortunately, we couldn't do some of the face-to-face things that Dr. Belk and his crew did, but we heard some things pretty loud and clear in terms of where they're coming from. And I was very encouraged by the involvement that they have with influencing quality and realizing how much they can influence quality. And I guess I'd have to say that I think they're actually in a great spot. There's a lot of great news in this audit. It's a little dangerous because the last thing we want to do is sit back and say, look at all these great things we've accomplished. Let's just kind of hang out here for a while and assume there's no problems. But I would say that the take-home to those producers, it does come to this major emphasis from the strategy workshop that these producers came in and even told us, is that the industry needs to tell the story. And that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But some of that is the fact that things aren't documented. Things aren't written down. There's no paper trail. There's no information that flows with the cattle. And I would say with a lot of those producers, generally they're doing things right. I mean, the vast majority of them, I think, are doing things right. But nobody knows that, and nobody knows or is able to distinguish between the ones doing it right and those few that do it wrong. And so they lump all of them together. And so when the people that do it wrong get in the news, it ruins everybody else's image. So I just think, to me, I think I said at the beginning, that's the biggest threat to our industry, but biggest opportunity for these entities. A packing plant is not going to be able to tell the entire beef story. Like you say, we've got to start with the genetics and the gametes and go all the way through the system. So absolutely, I think it's telling the beef story, but doing it strategically, the same terminology, the same methods, science-based, no spin, a lot of the things you talked about.
Tom, I think if you look in the last 20 years, out of the first quality audit, one of the things that came out of that, especially I know in the Texas group, of coming up with producer training programs. Beef 706 had its birthday in that and birth in that. And, think about the tens of thousands of cattle producers that have been trained in many states and all that since that time. The message we continue to say is understand what you're producing. If you're a cow-calf producer, you've got to still know what the end result of that calf is, even though it may be 6 months or a year later before that gets to that point. What's probably different today, that's still the same message. What continues that is how is it being transported? how it is being handled. What are the other factors involved in that? And today, it would also be, what's the sustainability of that approach? Are you being a good steward as far as the total program? So those continue to be added to the whole thing that people have to know about today and be responsible.
Keith.
Two things quickly. When I teach any class, but particularly the undergraduate meat science class that we teach, the moment I use the word food safety, I get a bad evaluation. And there's a reason for that. It's not sexy. Nobody is passionate about food safety. And I could say the same thing about perhaps some of the quality things that we talked about. A lot of you have heard a lot about these things, for the past 10, 15, 20 years. My point is, don't lose sight of the ball. These are still clearly the primary demand drivers for our product, and so don't lose sight of the ball. We need to continue to focus on those attributes. Secondly, don't be shy. There is a need for consumers to become part of our industry. We need to make them part of us. We need to eliminate this disconnect between what we do in production and what they do at consumption. And so we all need to do, including us, we need to do a better job of helping them understand how our production system works.
Great, thank you. John, any last comments you need to make to the group?
You bet. A couple of comments. Number one, this would not have happened if it hadn't been for Beef Board, or excuse me, for Beef Checkoff funding these guys. These guys have spent 2/3 of their career collecting information and trying to improve the beef industry, and they need to be committed to that. I'd like for you to give all these guys a hand.